Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Well, hello to my constant listeners and welcome back to my semi-constant listeners and a very special hello to my brand new listeners. And I want to give a special welcome to those of you who found out that our link with iTunes had been broken. We are now back in all of our usual places, and thank you for signing up with us again. I wanted to chat a bit about shamanism and pushing and exploring the boundaries and the borders. I think we can all agree, unless maybe you're a new listener and this is all brand new to you, and if it is, well, welcome for a great ride. I think it has always been a very important part of shamanism in this modern age, whether it's neo-shamanism or shamanism from a more pure perspective. The pushing of the boundaries has become an insightful way to explore not only ourselves, but where we come from and where we're going to end up. Pushing the boundaries and the borders in a traditional society, I really don't know what that would look like for the very simple reason that I do not come from a traditional society. I come from a place of a desire and a need to understand shamanism. And yes, I said need. It does become a need after a while. In order to push the boundaries, one of the challenges I set before you is to ask yourself how well acquainted you are with your imagination. How do you make friends with your imagination? Have you made friends with your imagination? The reason I ask this is shamanism and the journey itself is based upon the activation of the active imagination. Jung referred to it as the active imagination. I tend to kind of bristle at that term, even though I understand it from a psychological perspective. But from a shamanic perspective, it almost seems like a dismissal in a way. Beginning the journeys, especially for the first-timers or the people who aren't very comfortable with journeying, I request that you imagine a place in nature that you've been before. So again, we're activating that active imagination. Have said before, and I'll say it again, that imagination are the railroad tracks for the reality train to ride upon. I've said many times, and I really enjoy reminding us that without imagination, we would have absolutely nothing, including the ability to hear my voice through some magical airwaves and some magical places in clouds and chords that my voice can reach your ear. Don't think for a moment crossing the boundaries and the borders is challenging for shamans, for we have been doing that for many, many centuries. In older societies, the shaman, the witch doctor, shakes the bones and utters a curse, and the victim's heart flutters. His temperature drops and the death comes so quickly. And in modern times, maybe even today, maybe even yesterday, an autopsy would show that the hex, or maybe even a curse, depending on your language, the effect of causing the body to shut down. We could call that let me use a big word, parasympathetic nervous system death. The physiologists might call it just that. The victim dies not from fright, but from hopelessness, from the vivid working of the imagination. The imagination, like love, has been regarded as so sacred ground, too intimate, too holy to be dissected by the impersonal knife of science. It is also regarded as too remote because, listen to this, it can't be felt, smelt, or otherwise observed through the senses. Imagination has led us in many different ways. Shamanism is a path that is circular, As in the case of those of us who move from the realm to realm, and we return to do the healing work, sometimes to a person, and sometimes we feel like we're trying to heal the world. And when we go to those places and we return and we share our stories, and our stories are shared sometimes through some of the most beautiful sacred art. Ancestors were masters of yarn pictures and bead work. Think of the beautiful sand paintings that you've seen. All of these are attempts to share the spirit world through the media of this world. The visionary experiences are preserved in medicine bundles. Some of those medicine bundles had feathers, beads, skeletons of animals, stones, even shells, dried plants. It's very interesting what we choose to make a fetish, what we choose to create that sacred bundle. That trinket, that attachment for trinkets, that's an investment in the visionary experience. That's an investment in bringing back from that world to this world, creating a threshold objects. And we've talked about the beaver bundles before. I've talked about how the bundle in itself has become a collection of beautiful, intricate, and intimate relationships with spirit and messages. I'm often asked about the imagination, and I make a distinction between drugs and medicines. And one of the things that I've witnessed over time when I meet an individual who has had their doorways blown wide open in an attempt to have a spiritual or, just a very transcendent experience, I kind of see this as if we make an attempt at describing it, or if we make an attempt at visualization, to move along the circular path. I talked earlier about shamanism being in that circular path. What the drug attempts to do is to bring back the outer reaches to the linear mind. There are attempts to use drug as medicine through the cacophony of unfiltered consciousness, and bringing all of those pieces of the unfiltered consciousness back into resolution or back into place and space of the mind can be a challenge to reorganize. If we have a medicine, if we have a pathway, and especially if we have an individual who can guide us in that way, then we are bringing the ability to share that experience. We are bringing that circular view of the world back because we have a language to explore it with. We have a language to describe it. We have tools and methods, whether it's visual art, whether it's media art, whether it is whatever you do as a form of your own expression of art, of an unfiltered consciousness. Drugs are used in a spiritual tradition were medicine, the best medicine the world knew for thousands of years. But for a culture that has continually pushed itself away from the spirit of the world in all its institution, this is a culture that has tried its hardest to separate mind from body. And drugs only provide a tantalizing glimpse or taste or touch of mysticism. And we don't have a cultural myth anymore to explain that and to incorporate how we can integrate those experiences. We are mythless. We are not psycho-mythological beings anymore. As you can tell, I have a great love for imagination and for our reliance on imagination. In order to express and move through the boundaries of the mind and the self, I think it takes a certain amount of courage, and I believe that that courage has to find a new language. The new language is often found in the form of symbols, in the forms of building of structures. Those are part of the ways that we create or manifest from one world to another world what imagination has brought to us. There are many different paths that a mystic relationship to the mystic can have. There are many different paths to mysticism. There are many different paths to illumination. There are many different ways to access and assess the imaginal and the liminal space within ourselves. Shamanism busts through borders and boundaries because we have the innate understanding the world is complex as it is simple, even though the world is simply never simple. However, imagination in healing, imagination in changing the world around us, how we perceive the world around us. We have in our society an acceptance of imagination if it can better us. But we don't have an acceptance as an adult to use our imagination in play or in the garnering steps to mysticism, to understanding of self, to integrating self into a form that is transcended or changed from 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever the case is. The opportunity that we take when we engage our imagination is to break through the precepts that we have of how we act, who we are, and why we are. Pushing the borders and the boundaries is very important, I think even more so because we don't have a traditional society. We don't have traditional teachings. Because many of us are alone on our own seeking, we gather together for these words, but we gather together in community. So our imagination could be called or could be referred to as our collective campfire or collective fire. As we sit around the fire of imagination, then we can see the flecks and the changes in the flames and the temperatures and the color. And as we all sit around this campfire of imagination, as I share my words become part of your story, maybe. Or maybe what you share beyond is the story to another person that involves your imagination. Perhaps what we could be is warriors for imagination. Now, I know that sounds kind of funny, and really it is kind of funny. But what do I mean by that? It is really challenging to talk to adults that don't have childhood experience or work with. It's very challenging to talk to adults about imagination. It has become associated with something that only children do. So therefore, the only value that it has is to occupy your child, their child, another child away from you, and to engage and activate their brain growth, their executive functioning. Imagination goes well beyond that. If imagination didn't exist, then the traditional people in Mexico that Clarissa Pinkola Estes talked to wouldn't have been able to identify with what the moon looked like if they didn't, in their journeys, know that they had the ability to travel to the moon. So when they heard the stories of what the astronauts discovered, the shamans, the curandismos, the people of that area laughed and said, yeah, and it's very dusty, and continued on with their own understanding. In their own imagination, in their own way, they traveled from one realm to the other realm and had the same experience as those who worked and literally rode a rocket ship of imagination to a moon that people only imagined was out there, and brought back stories, accounts of the physicality of the moon that could be backed up and verified by the shamans of old who had traveled there. Find that fascinating. So boundaries and borders, do they really belong to us? Do they have anything to do with us? To be able to work oddly through the physics of time, for us to be able to travel and go against the theory of the movement of time. All time happens simultaneously. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, as you can likely tell, especially you, my constant listener. I'm going to go back now to the original point of my story. So as we work into this place of imagination, and as we work into a place of making imagination more acceptable into the adult world, we recognize that we can change our perception. Maybe I can't change so-and-so's perception who sits across from me. Perhaps I can change my perception of them. If I can travel through the boundaries and the borders, break through things that nobody else does, if I can defy physics and travel through past lives and past times and come back with very verifiable stories, especially in doing healing work, traveling back 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years into a person's timeline. Return with stories that are very true and can be identified. That again is pushing the border and the boundaries. That again is using that imaginal, that liminal realm, that realm of imagery, that realm of that collective unconscious. I'm going to go there. Yes, you know I will. Because imagination and the archetypes of symbols are going to be found in the collective unconscious. They're going to be found in the spirit world. The spirit world has the hallmarks of many different types of imagination. Hence, how would we know what the moon looked like if we hadn't traveled through the spirit world? Is there a moon in the collective unconscious that particular shamans have been building from all sorts of places around the world for centuries? All the thousands of years of humankind. Could be. I don't see why not. If there is a world mountain in the spirit world, it is truly a composite mountain for the spirits and the shamans who have traveled into the collective unconscious and met at the mountain and gone to the mountain, and all that imagination of what the mountain means to a culture, to a people, a mythology, to the cosmology of a particular group of people. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched, if we use our imagination, that is, that shamans from all over the world have gathered information on a celestial being called the moon and have gradually filled in the holes of what the moon does look like, slowly built the concept of the moon before human life, pre-human life, and throughout human life. For the collective unconscious and the spirit world has been building for all of this time, and is the repository and the collectiveness, obviously, as the term says, of all of the things. How do we access that? How do we access that as shamans if we don't use our imagination? Our imagination is a conscious concept. We take our imagination and we travel through our personal unconscious. And this sometimes is where we bump into our shadow. This is sometimes where we go, oh, that memory. Oh, I forgot about that memory, because your imagination just kind of tossed it aside and said, nah, we don't need to play with that. Let's just shove that over there. But as you travel through it, because you imagined that you could, and you imagined that you would see pieces of yourself, and you imagined that you would find healing, voila, there you are, in the Kepacha, in the middle world, in the personal unconscious, in that place where we are revealed. And as we travel deeper, because our imagination says that we can, into the spirit world and into, as psychoanalysts will tell you, you can travel into the collective unconscious as well. Whatever the term is that you use, let's be honest. If you didn't think you could get there, i.e. use your imagination, you never would have got there. If you never would have got there, you never would have seen what you had seen. And many times, the spirit world absolutely defies your imagination, which may or may not, and you can certainly discuss with me both, may or may not be the result of other people's imagination and building of the spirit world before you got there. As I continually remind my constant listener, the spirit world doesn't run dependent on you, but runs what? Exactly, independent of you. We affect the spirit world as much as the spirit world affects us. Perhaps the spirit world affects us more because we are still very activated by our imagination. If we have a very mind-expanding experience in the spirit world, let's say we met our spirit that has protected us as we drive in our car, or as we ride our bike, or as we ride our motorbike. What does that look like? And when we get into that vehicle of transportation and we've met the spirit that has guarded our transportation, do we imagine then that that spirit rides with us because we use our imagination? Do we then also create a feeling of familiarity? Does that feeling of familiarity get filled with your concept of that familiarity? Doesn't imagination, if we run on this vein, doesn't this imagination then become a building block for your perceptions of not only your internal world, but, if you're lucky, your external world? Think on that for a second. Where do we go when we use our imagination? Yes, we can use our imagination for play, and some people even really like playing, and some people have a magical child archetype or an archetype that allows them the ability to play, or they still have that sense of fun. But I have met many humans in my walk that have no access to play. So we expand our definition of imagination. And if imagination doesn't come out in artistic form, could imagination come out in the form of cooking? Could imagination come out in the form of architecture, 3D building? Could imagination come out where? Does it have to stay inside? It really doesn't. Our imagination can take us into amazing places on the inside of ourselves. It can also take us to amazing places on the outside of ourselves. It can take you to faraway lands. It can take you to faraway experiences. And what do you do with those experiences? You share it in story with other people. If you didn't have the imagination to go there in the first place, you wouldn't have garnered a story. If you wouldn't have garnered a story, you wouldn't have brought back and expanded the minds and the imaginations of your friends or your colleagues or whatever experience you're sharing. You see how you can never really get away from imagination? Even though we're told to foo-foo our imagination, I can no longer have a day without imagination than I could have a day without breath. Imagination allows us to fill ourselves with possibility. And I think right now, in this time of global upheaval, we could certainly use possibility. And more so, we could use hope. If we imagine hope, what would hope look like? If we were pushing boundaries and borders, what would hope look like? I don't know. I don't know what hope looks like for you. I don't even know what hope means for you. That's something that you're going to have to unpack on your own. I'm helping you to, well, maybe I'm not. It is my intention to bring to you another view or facet of imagination. It is my intention to help us all push through the boundaries and the borders that have been set up for us, whether they be physical boundaries or conscious or spiritual or imagination or mental. We certainly have to take into account the possibility we do imagine things. That comes more from my perspective in the daydream realm, not so much in the realm, the protected realm or the beautiful realm of the collective unconscious or the spirit world. I have a very beloved and beleaguered and long sought after relationship with imagination, creativity. I see them too as very, very bound to each other. I think of imagination as that chakra just above your head that pours in the messages of spirit. It pours through the crown chakra and into the mind, and then the mind creates with an idea, can be seen through the inner vision, and then that idea is created maybe by voice, maybe in the heart and down through the hands, maybe in dance. I don't know. I don't have a clue how that's going to manifest for you. In our shamanic journeys, in our ceremonies, in our beliefs, we are able to imagine what life would be like with hope, with the ability to expand our horizon of what could be. If life changes because of a new virus that has infected us, how can we live with this way and use our imagination to do so? We're not at the end of who we are. We're just changing who we are. We're not at the end of what was. We're just shifting what was. Through all the losses, seen, unseen, known, and unknown, to me personally that affected you, I would like to really encourage you to activate your imagination, to wonder, truly wonder what you could do in the next 24 hours, in the next 2 hours, in the next 48 hours that can change your perception of yourself, maybe just for a moment. If you can imagine it, create space for it, manifest it, then you have shifted and changed Change can go away and go back to exactly the way things were. We push borders and boundaries because we don't want things to go back exactly the way we were. We explore the journey world. We explore the collective unconscious. We explore our spirit kin because we can, and because we are curious creatures. If you've lost your curiosity, perhaps a journey to the spirit world to find your curiosity is a good thing, because again, I remind you that we can break through the confines of quantic space and time and move forward and backward on time in order to see things, figure out things, heal things, fix things. Time is part of the imagination. Time is that part of the self that shifts. Imagination. Where would we be without imagination? Who would we be without imagination? Would we be nearly as fun without imagination? Would we be nearly as excited without imagination? I don't know. I don't really know what you think about imagination. Imagination allows us to fill and fulfill our place in a way. I think we try to see imagination as an avenue out, and it is an avenue out. It goes from this place to that place and that place back to this place. Imagination, if we can engage it for the next 24 hours and 48 hours to affect something in your life so that you can see something shifting. I know that in times of great tragedy and in time of hopelessness and in time of fear and paranoia and anger, we lose sight of what makes us genuinely amazing, what makes us genuinely alive. For me, activating my imagination and making small changes and continual changes to make effect is going to help me move through this time of great changes and shifts. Pushing the boundaries and the borders by using my imagination is my right. It is my goddess, God, divine self, soul, universe bestowed upon me right. My imagination is not your lackey. It is my friend. And in speaking with adults about imagination, I imagine they're receptive. It doesn't always work out, but I at least can imagine that, right? Keep in mind, because we do have good imaginations, and if I haven't convinced you yet, I want you to think for just a moment. Have you ever imagined a scenario? Perhaps you got into an argument, and a couple of hours later, you thought about that argument again, or that experience, and you bespoke, oh, I wish I would have said this, I wish I would have done that. And when you go through that experience using simply your imagination, you have a physiological effect. That physiological effect changes the rhythms and the chemicals in your body, creating never seen before effect on the body. If imagination can do that for the negative, I'm going to challenge you because, this is not the first time you've ever been challenged with this. But imagine something a little bit better. I ask you to gently ask yourself, has my voice of the self-critic been as loud or louder than the voice of my self-acceptance? Until next time, my beautiful, wonderful, constant listeners, my semi-constant listeners, my brand new listeners, may we meet around again this fire, this campfire of our voices and our ears, and share our imaginations and our stories of imagination. Maybe you'll walk away from this shifted and changed and able to step forward a little bit lighter. Thank you for sharing your ever-precious time with me. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your thoughts and your worries with me.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.